Garth was here right after he got, you know, I guess he was briefly in jail, and when he got out, he came here first to speak at Liberty, and that was a really big deal. And, you know, Liberty brought a lot of people, and Lynchburg College too, and the other schools.
Right, they do. They really do. You interview a lot of interesting people in the Lynchburg area, not celebrities. Where do you find them?
So sometimes they find me, or their friends find me. And I mean, sometimes I get sicked on people. You should really write about my neighbor, you know, he's so interesting. and sometimes they're not. I mean, my favorite call along those lines is, you should really talk to my neighbor. She's 95 years old and she still writes all her own checks. And I said, okay, what else is there about her that's interesting? Well, that's about it. Okay, I'll make a note of that, thank you. But you know, the thing about journalism, we all kind of pat ourselves on the back all the time, like Watergate, for example. Watergate wouldn't have happened had someone not called Woodward and Bernstein. 99% of what we put in the paper is because someone tells us about it. So, and sometimes people have a hard time with that. They'll call up and say, why didn't you cover some event? Well, nobody told us. Oh. We thought you just know somehow. Yeah. Which is kind of funny because the name of our paper is the News and Advance, and several times I've been talking to somebody in another state, and they say, well, what was the name of your paper again? And I'll tell them, and they'll say, you get the News in Advance? You know, like we're the psychic newspaper, but unfortunately we're not. I wish we were.
Do you, just right off the top of your head, who is the most interesting person that you can think of, if you can think of anybody?
You know, oddly enough, I kind of can. I was thinking about that on the way over here. I mean, I've written probably, I think I figured it out a year or so ago, like 5,000 columns, which is kind of funny because I had a guy come up to me once in a grocery store and he said, you're that guy who writes a column in the paper. And I said, yeah. He goes, you wrote one once that I really liked.
Just one?
Yeah. And I said, well, thanks. What was it about? And he said, I don't remember.
You must not have, well.
But I do. Years ago, I went out to Buckingham and I interviewed a guy named Bhagavan Antle, who was living at Yogaville, or who was active at Yogaville, and he was sort of an Indian mystic sort of guy. And one of the things that was interesting about him is he raised Bengal tigers on this farm in Buckingham. He had 15 or 20 of them in cages. And but the other thing, I sat down at a table to talk to him, and he said, and we got to talking about mind control, and he got a dollar bill from me and he put it on the table and he lifted it off the table, and I reached all around it and could not find any, you know, if it was a trick, it was brilliant because he didn't have time to. And I just remember that was just really intriguing to me. I mean, of course, I mean, just about everybody I talked to is interesting in their own way, I think. I firmly believe that you could write a story on anyone. The trouble is some people don't realize that they're interesting.
And you know, that's one of the things that you did in our writing class, was to say you take this person from your family and write something about them and find out that they are interesting people. And we did, and did find out that they were. So, you know, that was a good skill to have. Are you inundated with people who want you to do a column on them?
Well, not inundated exactly, but yeah, I do get, you know, every week I get probably, you know, half dozen or so people who, I don't get letters that much anymore. It's all emails and phone calls and that sort of thing. But yeah, and what I do sometimes, there's certain things that fit as a column and something, and it's really hard to explain what they are. And some things really are more news stories. So what I do a lot of times is I try to send them along to the appropriate person on the staff, you know, who might be better to do that kind of story.
I was going to ask you how you handle that, because I've been doing this show almost a year, and I do have some people who will call and say, you know, I've got this really interesting thing that I'd like you to do, and it's, you know, like shelling beans or something, you know.
Well, sometimes as you talk to people, you can and draw them out, you find out it really is interesting, but the way they present it to you, you know, like we'll get calls like, you should cover our event because the mayor's going to be there. You know, but it's like, we want to talk to the mayor, all we have to do is call her up. I mean, this is not, but they, you know, bless their heart, they think it's a big deal because the mayor is at their event, you know. So.
Now tell me, have you ever interviewed an individual and the interview took a turn that you weren't expecting it to take?
Oh, that happens all the time, actually. You know? And in fact, a lot of times I find I get the best quotes after I put away my notebook, stick it in my pocket, and they're walking me to the door. And then usually, a lot of times, they'll say something really good, and so I'll run out of the car and write it down.
Cool.
There was a case Andy Sale, who's a Presbyterian minister in town, is into just about everything. Used to be the pastor at Quaker Memorial. He used to be the head of the presbytery for the region. We were talking about he is related to Meriwether Lewis, and interestingly enough, they want to exhume Meriwether Lewis and bury him somewhere else. And Andy is the person they have picked to do the service because he is a relative, a descendant of his. So we were talking about that, and we were sitting out on his back patio, and he has a garden, and we got talking about groundhogs. And he told me this great story about he had to have a heart trap and trapped a couple of the groundhogs that were just devastating his garden. And he took them over to Madison Heights and let them out. And a little while later, he was talking to a friend from Madison Heights, and they said, well, that's funny because we take our groundhogs and we let them out over on Trents Ferry Road. So apparently we're just exchanging groundhogs back and forth. But I did a little blog entry, and I just thought that was a funny story.
When I read that in your blog, I laughed out loud. I just think that's, you can see, you have such a style. Your writing, when you're reading a column, you feel like you're talking. I mean, I feel like I'm talking to you, you're talking to me. So when I was reading about the groundhog, and didn't the man get caught by the police?
Well, yeah.
Somebody who was dumping.
When Andy was dumping his groundhog down by the river, right across the river, you take that first right, and it takes you. And I think he just said something about, what are you doing down here? And Andy said something. He started to say something about a groundhog, and the deputy said, I don't want to hear it.
That's right.
And he turned around and walked away. So, because apparently that happens a lot.
I just think that's a wonderful story. And, your style of making it seem like you're talking to your reader, and your sense of humor, which I think is just off the scale. Is this something you've developed, or is it just the way you are?
I was kind of the class clown type person in school, so I guess maybe I've always sort of had that. But when you're writing, especially something like a column, you get to a point where, and it takes a while, but you get to a point where the way you write is also the way you talk.
Right. So
you don't have to translate, because most people, when they first start writing, they translate into kind of writer-ese from the way they talk. And when you think about it, a lot of the books that you really like, especially the first-person type books, are just kind of colloquial, and they're not stuffy.
And most of the authors I like have a tendency to write similarly to the way you write, and it's just like a dialogue, a conversation with somebody, and I think that's really special.
I think one thing that's important for a columnist is you cannot take yourself too seriously.
No.
Which I have never done. So, and people don't realize too, a column it's opinion, but when it's funny. I've never understood why people get so offended or upset when someone expresses an opinion, because it is, after all, just your opinion. And a lot of times I'll say things just to get to kind of generate some response, and which is getting harder for me the longer I do it, because I've been writing this column for so long that I think a lot of people just sort of regard me as like an eccentric relative. So I'll write something and they'll just say, oh, that's just him. Who cares what he thinks? It's kind of like your Uncle Fred, who always says these weird ideas at Thanksgiving dinner table, and you just sort of dismiss them. That's the way they look at me. I can't get them angry at me anymore.
But I think that's the beauty of your column.
Yeah.
And I have a question down here. Have you ever written a column that you've gotten criticism from someone that you've angered?
Oh, sure.
People that you actually anger instead of just disagree with your opinion.
Oh, sure. And sometimes the people that get mad are people you're not even trying to